Hello everybody, let's gather together. The break is almost over and I can see that the room gets empty faster than any superconductor of your company. Or can it be filled as quickly as possible again?
This can
Please
be,
take a seat.
by the power of supercapacitors, this room can be filled just in a few seconds. So let's give it a moment.
But we will be kicking off. My name is Linnar Viik. I am the surprise interview maker. I'm a chairman of EIT Digital, European Innovation and Technology Institute of the Digital branch. And as a matter of fact, I'm very happy to introduce you once again Taavi Madiberk, CEO of Skeleton Technologies. And Taavi is also part of our EIT family portfolio once.
Yeah.
And our purpose today is really to cover the topics of deep tech. Taavi, let's start, while people are gathering, let's start talking about what the hell is deep tech and how it differentiates from any other technology we have seen so far.
Yeah, sure. So if you think about deep tech is something which is based on tangible engineering innovations or scientific breakthroughs. If you look at examples, this starts from whether we talk about quantum computing, nuclear fusion, batteries, hydrogen. Also, if you think about COVID and the vaccines, the mRNA vaccine was based actually on deep tech. And of course, it is so that I think that when we talk about deep tech, we have to keep one thing in mind. That in the end of the day, scientific discoveries have no intrinsic value if they do not improve the lives of people. And sometimes it just takes maybe 10, 20, even 50 years to get there. But I think this is of crucial importance to keep in mind when we talk about deep tech. And I must say that if I think about the potential of Europe, let's be honest, if you look at the main waves what we have had globally, personal computing, World Wide Web, mobile computing, cloud computing, we can be extremely proud. Europe was leading in all of those categories when it comes to science and academia. But we basically missed all of those waves. If you think about Europe in terms of the main technology waves, then we are more of a, let's say, technology museum in a sense. And now with the wave of deep tech, I think this is, let's say, the natural domain of Europe. We have extremely strong R&D in Europe, but we really lag behind in terms of commercializing the innovations. This is similar that if you think about now the most successful companies who are really changing the world. Think about Tesla. Let's be honest, US back in, let's say, 2004, it was a country of petrol heads. The innovation, the electrification was happening in Europe, but we did not commercialize on that. So I think that deep tech holds a lot of promise in terms of solving, let's say, the underlying issues of humanity. But I think it's important also to get rid of a little bit in every like tech wave, you have this, what I would call politely, the bullshit factor. But just because a company says it's deep tech does not mean that it will immediately result in terms of a great business case, or it will immediately result in terms of, let's say, changing the globe. And in the end of the day, in real life, if you talk about fighting climate change or curing cancer, etc., only real life results matter. Yeah, that was a long answer to a very short question.
But before getting into busting the bullshit factor out of the deep tech promises, let's go back to something which you said about European paradox.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything has changed. The European paradox, if anybody does not know, is that we invest heavily into higher education, research and development. And since scientific process outputs based on the science core theory are public, not private, they are public, then it means the one who wants to commercialize the outputs of the public science are good entrepreneurs, and in Europe we have failed. So majority of the technological innovations based on the new science have been commercialized by US or Asian companies. So, but it's 2022 and nothing has changed in my mind. Do you think that deep tech is also just a bullshit bingo around the European paradox. We still, with few exceptions, and those exceptions have always been, are not still capable of delivering or converting that into new jobs, new solutions, and address really, with a commercial perspective also, the real problems.
Yeah, I think that there is this bullshit bingo factor inside, but we should a little bit take a wider look. But if you look at last year in terms of deep tech investments, in Europe we are talking about 10 billion of investments, which is actually 25% of the total venture capital investments. And I think a little bit things have changed in Europe, but I would go perhaps back in history, back to Tesla again, because usually we like to say that, okay, why Europe does not have this type of companies? Well, it's a cultural factor that we are not the risk takers, we shy away from failure, etc. And this is, let's say, kind of the conventional knowledge. But one thing what people forget is that in deep tech, the government policy is really critical. And many of us hail Tesla as the success of the US free capital markets. And to be honest, partly, in large part, that is true, but we forget one aspect. But when Tesla went public back in 2011, they raised $220 million. But before that, Obama program from the Department of Energy had given the guys a $500 million loan. And think about it, you give $500 million loan to a fledgling car company, no track record, CEO is taking LSD, and you still give that $500 million. And this worked out extremely nice, actually. And if you look at the same time in Europe, if let's say me and Linnar would have come up with we want to build our own car company, of course we would have had different challenges, but there was no governmental policy in place for that. And this is what we forget in Europe. And I think that especially in deep tech, because deep tech is really the question of technology validation and also off-take customers, we do not have that policy in place. And take another example, SpaceX. SpaceX is not possible in Europe simply because of the governmental policy. So I would say that things are changing in Europe. If you think about the battery industry, when 4 years ago, when you talk to German automotive OEMs, they said, battery manufacturing in Europe, never. Chinese are cheaper, we are more efficient, we are way behind. Today you see all these gigafactories popping up across Europe. And the point is the following, that there was also European policy in place with the Battery Alliance, with certain loan programs, etc. And I think that I wouldn't give up on Europe and just to say that we are really great at building the world's best technology museums. I think things have changed. Battery industry is proving that. Hydrogen is the next. And now I think from big wave perspective, it's like, let's take BioNTech. It's a real success story in terms of a company which did not find for years any proper application for the mRNA technology until COVID came along. So I'm quite optimistic when it comes to the future of deep tech. And of course, this being said, are we in a good situation like maybe US and China is? The answer is no. And I would say that at the final point in terms of deep tech and capital markets, how many of you are familiar with SPACs?
Well, quite a number.
Quite a number of people. And in terms of SPACs, we can say, okay, this is financial innovation, but it's, like Linnar says, partly bullshit bingo in terms of if you look at the real stock market performance. But what is maybe important is that I think that in general, if you take the big picture, then this was very beneficial to deep tech companies. You had quantum computing companies go public, get financed. You had many electric vehicle, many battery, many hydrogen companies doing that. And I think that if you talk about deep tech, then one thing is building the profitable business, which, let's say, if you talk about sustainability and you do not plan to be sustainable in financial terms, you shouldn't talk about it. But the other thing is that I think that this type of hype, what we had in the financial markets, actually helped to kickstart many of the deep tech projects, and it will be a bumpy ride going forward for Europe, but deep tech in general.
Before getting into the disagreement which I have about the importance of the policies, and once again, when Europe gets into policy making, it's time when investors start leaving the party. When we're looking to the regulation or regulatory framework around artificial intelligence, it either means that we are trying to avoid that regulation, or we try to move with our investments to better and more openly and more flexibly regulated areas. However, I would like to come to one notion. When we look around the Latitude, not only this year, but in general terms, not only your outfit this year is relatively different compared to the most of the companies present. You're clearly overdressed, you are clearly deep tech dressed.
Yes, I'm very deep. I actually went to the startup gala early this year. And when I was wearing a t-shirt, and I saw all of the guys, they had like suits and really fancy dresses. When I thought that, okay, this time I will show them and that I can dress politely as well. But it always happens to me that in terms of whether underdressed or overdressed, I can't hit the mark here. So.
However, the point is very different. The point is actually that vast majority of the companies here are not deep tech innovators. They are business innovations. And that means in the same time that the success stories we are following here, the unicorns, they are business innovations with not really too competitive technologies supporting that process. However, they are unicorns. And this is something what also investors are seeking, and success stories. When we look broader in Europe and also in Estonia, the companies which have strong scientific experience and expertise and also competitive technological base are not the companies which have enjoyed any success. So Skeleton is one of the few examples, not in only in Estonian scenery, but also in European scenery, where you have combined two things: deep technological competencies and competitive advantages around that. You have also addressed really big purpose and societal problem, and you have combined it also to a certain degree also with a nice valuation and commercialization. So what's your secret compared to others that have failed?
I think that the first secret is that back in 2009, when we started Skeleton in the midst of economic crisis, we just didn't know any better. We literally thought that, okay, getting to the automotive market, maybe it takes us 3 years. We work hard, maybe we can get there in 2. And I think that when we got started, when we had so much ambition, but we were a little bit naive in terms of how much the deep tech cycle takes. And if I would have known that, okay, it takes 10 years before we can start servicing the German automotive OEMs, before sending people to space or making nuclear fusion happen, what we do every day in Skeleton. But anyways, I think that was one of the aspects. But the second aspect, what was, I think, really important, that we managed to put together a really complementary team. And I think this is like, if you start a deep tech company, you do need the experience and science as well. It is quite difficult to do. If I would have done it myself, and I'm actually a law student who never finished university, let's be honest. But we did it together with Dr. Leys and Dr. Bergson, who now this year we were nominated by the European Patent Office for the European Inventor of the Year Award 2022. But then I think that additional thing is like, never give up. If you look at the story of, okay, Skeleton is on a smaller scale, but the story of Tesla, when they also had many instances where we were close to failure, but they never give up. And I think the important factor, what maybe keeps a deep tech company going for longer and has more tenacity, is that in terms of achieving your goal, it's not about, let's say, only the profitability, etc., but you have a bigger goal. And when all of this combined, think about it, 2009, 2 Eastern European law students saying that, well, let's start making supercapacitors and let's go to the German automotive market. Hardware is hard, deep tech is even harder. The chances or likelihood is quite low. But I think what helped us early on is that we got the first customers like European Space Agency, That's why a little bit what I mean by policy is that having these off-take customers, that they were the first ones to believe that, okay, some weird guys in Tartu in a lab, that they can actually make a difference on a global scale, and they were the first one to pay to actually pay money for the super caps. And then from investors' side, we had to be really inventive, because if you think about even times like 2013 or 2015, investing in manufacturing and in climate, this was not popular at all. And we got, whether we look at Harju Electric from Estonia, but we got many of the entrepreneurs backing up us. Not so much VC capital, which we now have in as well, but really entrepreneurs who have built businesses themselves. And if you look at the deep tech development cycle, you can easily say it's 10 years. Sometimes it can take 15 years or more. And then it's really important which investors you have in place, because what we discussed with Linnar earlier as well, that if you have an investment fund which has the total cycle of 10 years.
And investment cycle of 4+1.
Exactly. Then they are perhaps not the best partner. And you need to, of course, consider that you need significantly more capital than you would need in terms of...
Not only more, but different capital.
Different capital, exactly. Yeah.
Well, this is also the message for the investors here. If you pretend to be interested in deep tech, but your fund is really about getting quick returns and being maximum 10 years in your longevity, well, don't really look at deep tech at that stage. However, now you have come to that stage where you are interesting also for the VC funds.
Yeah.
So give a hint to investors how to recognize the deep tech company that is ready for VC investment.
Yeah, I think that there's no like big secret about it. It's actually let's say you have to look at the customers and you need to look at the commercial takeoff. I think what is maybe different in deep tech, that you need to a little bit understand more what is behind the customer relationship, because you can ship samples to Audi, BMW or Volkswagen. That doesn't necessarily mean that you will go into full manufacturing with them. So you need to understand those customer relationships. And secondly, you should be able to have the basic evaluation in terms of technology. If you look at our first Estonian investors who came on board, they said that, Taavi, we really like you. We think it's a great idea. But if you talk about the supercapacitors, how do we know that what is inside it? It might as well be an elephant inside, and we couldn't actually recognize that. We were really honest about it. And then they ordered a very thorough technology due diligence from an institute in Copenhagen in order to get that understanding. And I think that is maybe the important factor, that when you invest in deep tech, let's say, have the network or knowledge or be ready to do the real due diligence, what is behind it. Because if you think about, let's say, the bullshit factor, then bullshit factor is high in certain areas of life. Politics, for example, we all know. But also, for example, in science. If you look at even Nature and Science articles, you find very often that you can't replicate some of the testing what has been done. And that's why in deep tech, the network effect is important. And when we talk about, let's say, innovation or breakthroughs, if for every battery innovation, what you read in the news, if even 1% would work, then our electric vehicles would be charging today in 3 to 5 minutes. We would have ranges of 1,000 kilometers plus, but it's not there yet. Just give Skeleton still 5 years time, and we will maybe help with that as well.
Well, we have covered the story around the deep tech itself, the capital needs, the cycle of those companies, and we are getting closer to the end of our session. Before we are closing, I would like to go through a little bit of the topic related to the deep tech and deep purpose, because if we are used to the fact that there is a startup company that is focused to solving one small problem very quickly, then deep tech, but quite opposite, has a long agenda of using a new competence and science to address the global problem. And that is couple of decades away. But would you like to highlight a couple of those big problems that you think deep tech is about to solve and how Europe could fit into that process, not just contributing with an excellence in academia.
Yeah, sure. So climate change, clearly. And
do we believe man-caused climate change in this room?
And I have a second question.
Thank you.
Warming or cooling?
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least part of the audience knows what we are talking about.
Yeah,
go ahead.
But the point is that I think one of the biggest myths what we have today is like that we can solve climate change just by using the existing technology. This will, let's be fair, this will not happen with existing technology. Fundamental breakthroughs and deep tech is needed. And if you think about our current situation also with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, then it is very clear that policymakers will firstly think about, okay, we do need LNG. That makes a lot of sense. But long term, Europe needs to be able to have certain level of energy independence. And this can come only from renewables and energy storage. In terms of breakthroughs, what we need is the cost of electrolyzers and hydrogen storage, the cost of batteries. This needs to go down significantly, and it will not come only from the scale-up effect. So if you think about the future, it's not the time to go back and say, no, we need fossil fuels and more imports. Yes, we need it in the short term, but long term, it comes from renewable energy and energy storage. Second topic maybe is quantum computing. If you talk about, let's say, fundamental breakthroughs in medical or developing drugs, or even, let's say, the battery industry, supercapacitors, then that computing power is really needed. And I think people underestimate the potential, because quantum computing is one of the industries which is always like, when it will happen, it's always n plus 10 years, n being today, and it always happens in 10 years' time. But I think we have really come to a phase where in quantum computing we will see some practical applications now in maybe 7 to 10 years' time. And furthermore, if you think about now diseases, we talked about mRNA, but I think that globally, let's say, the threat of additional pandemics, whether it's COVID or something additional, then I must agree here with Bill Gates in terms that, do we think that we are now out of the woods with having a global pandemic? I think that's not the case. And where those are the issues what we need to solve. So it might seem like deep tech is somewhere further away, but even if we talk about very practical question of let's say, the Ukrainian war, the energy crisis, it's here. And I think one important aspect what I would like to highlight, that I'm in the board of the European Innovation Council. Mm-hmm. And we are now pushing through that if you talk about European deep tech, Ukraine is part of Europe. We cannot lose that potential in terms of the Ukrainian engineers. We have a number in skeleton. I think all of the Estonian startup companies have really talented Ukrainian engineers, and we need to invest as EU also to Ukrainian deep tech. So long story short, how we can contribute this, if you talk about policy as well, what you mentioned earlier, I think that here is a clear message is that cash is king, but don't, in European policy, don't give cash on, let's say, governmental terms. Always you need to match the market. And I think this is what policymakers are maybe forgetting, that they want to build own ecosystem, but actually you need to just further catalyze and support the private investors, private companies who are actually making the change. And last point, the climate change and this stuff, this will not be solved by the governments. That's bullshit. This will not happen. It will be solved by the private sector. We just need certain policies in place, but otherwise to keep out of the way of private entrepreneurs. Back to you, Linnar.
Thank you. And one more thing, if we are looking for the quick solutions, then it's a change in behavior. We have been recognizing and thinking about gas and oil and the price of that. 25% of the savings could take place just by changing your habits. However, this is another very important topic you never mentioned about. Yeah. It's a new wave of deep tech companies which are addressing the opportunities of change of behavior in certain age groups, societies. And I never liked a situation where we are believing that next technology new technology will solve all the problems that we as a man have caused, and we can continue our party as usual, but there is a new technology just coming and helping us. However, ladies and gentlemen, that was a quick session together with Taavi, Skeleton Technologies, Deep Tech, and the Promise for the Europe. Taavi, thank you once again, and we will be soon continuing on the same stage with cyber topics. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.